My guess is that most of us come to church with questions of one kind or another on our minds. Some of those questions may be very concrete. How can I deal with this problem that's hanging over my head? How can I juggle all the demands coming at me right now? What, I wonder, is my doctor going to say to me next week when I see her? And often new questions start percolating in the course of the service itself. As we settle into the pews and listen and sing and pray, questions come up. Can I really believe all the things we're singing and saying? Is God really here when I don't seem to sense God much at all? Does God really care about me? How can this service here really make a difference for me when I go back to work on Monday? Questions upon questions. I suppose that one of the frustrations for many of us is that we come to church looking for good, solid, clear wisdom and advice that will be answers to all our questions. And the problem is we often come and get back only more questions. I've heard parishioners say that they just wish sermons could be more practical and useful. Wouldn't it be great to walk away from church with 5 surefire steps to being close to God, 6 strategies for a perfectly harmonious relationship with our teenager, 7 arguments to prove the existence of God to our skeptical friend, and 10 secrets to a happy life? Why don't we get clarity? Who doesn't want clarity in our lives? We look for answers so we can put an end to the never-ending complexities and mysteries and imponderables we live with. Clear answers can help remove the anxiety of living in a perplexing world that so often we just can't quite figure out. Will Willimon, who was the dean of Duke University Chapel some years ago, reports hearing a preacher give a nice, tidy sermon on how to achieve happiness in life. The preacher said he was going to give 3 principles to live by, and people were to take out a piece of paper and write them down and take notes on what he said. And his 3 daring principles were: work hard, have a positive attitude, and pray daily. And he talked at length over all of those. And Willimon said all he could think was, is this really what the depth and sweep of Christian faith is all about? Isn't life so much richer and more complicated and more demanding than a simple little 3-point sermon? So you will not get a 3-point sermon today. One of the strangest things about Jesus is that he often seems a lot more interested in asking questions than in putting out nice, clear answers. In fact, in the 4 Gospels together, Jesus asks a total of 307 different questions. I didn't count them, but somebody else did. In fact, my good friend Martin Copenhaver, for many years a UCC pastor in Wellesley, has just published a book on those 307 questions. And he also says that Jesus himself asked others 183 questions, and of the 183, only ever answered 3 of them. Many of his questions that he fires again and again are rhetorical and aren't meant to elicit answers. He will say in the Sermon on the Mount, "Can any of you, by worrying, add a single moment to your lifespan?" Or, "For if you love those who love you, what reward is that?" Some questions are just straightforward. Which one of you is without sin? Or why are you so anxious about the clothes you wear? And some questions are clearly probing. Why do you not understand what I'm saying? Or, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or, have I been with you so long and you still do not know me? Other questions are simply obvious. Do you want to be well? Or, why are you terrified? And other questions are repeated again and again. Jesus many times would see somebody and say, "What do you want me to do for you?" But some questions are heart-rending. After Peter betrayed Jesus 3 times on the way to the cross, the risen Jesus asks him 3 times, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" I once took a graduate class on the Victorian novel and looked forward to reading and discussing a stack of 800-page Dickens and Trollope novels, only to discover that the professor had different ideas. He decided we would spend more than half the semester on the first chapter of one Trollope novel. He never gave us a lecture. He just asked questions. Why do we meet this character first? What is the writer trying to say in the very first words? Why does this first scene tell us exactly this? Why do we meet this character first? Why did he use those words to describe this person? Not a single answer ever came in the whole semester, not a single lecture, but a quest for us to explore, imagine, and discover for ourselves. Great teachers are often great questioners. Maybe the most famous teacher in history was Sophocles, who, according to Plato, taught by relentlessly asking questions one after another as the only way deeply to probe the deepest truth of things. One of my favorite spiritual writers is Richard Rohr, who declares that Jesus' style was almost the opposite of those television preachers you see in those higher numbers on your cable. And even some of our mainline preachers, he says, who are giving nice, concrete, easy advice. Jesus, he says, is like a Zen master. He asks questions to push our thinking beyond the familiar, to break open the way we see. Nice, clear answers, Rohr says, give us more of a feeling of success and closure and knowing it all. Easy answers instead of hard questions allow us to try to change others instead of allowing God to change us. All summer, our gospel readings have been focusing on Jesus' teaching, on many questions that come up in his great Sermon on the Mount, his manifesto for what God wants for the whole world. In the parables, he would tell time and again that were not obvious and often strange, but require that you stay with it and ponder it and question it to figure out what on earth he wanted us to see. But now, today, he's paused well into his ministry, getting ready to go to Jerusalem soon to check in with the disciples and says, "Who do people say that I am?" A question. And he gets a smattering of responses back, one after the other. And then he asks the pointed question of the disciples, "Yes, but who do you say that I am?" The most personal, the most pointed, the most abrupt question of all. Jesus isn't asking about people's opinion of what he's doing, people's ideas about what he said, whether people agree with him or not. What he's asking is, who is ready to go with this? Who's ready to say yes to where I want to take you? Not what do you think or what's your opinion, but where are you with God and with me? Do you want to be fully alive? Are you willing to take the plunge to discover what God really can do in you? That's the real question. Will you come and follow me and discover with me the answers to all those questions? And speaking of questions, it's been a sad and tragic week for our world, one that raises a whole set of questions of our own. We're facing the reality that a horrific force for evil called ISIS has been unleashed in the Middle East and promises to threaten many parts of the world. We have grieved the brutal death of the photojournalist James Foley, who ultimately gave his life to record the sufferings of the victims of war in our world. We followed the humanitarian disaster in Syria, but in country after country. We've watched the never-ending conflict taking place with Palestine and Israel and the human carnage that comes from that. And then, closest to home, we've watched the tragedy of Ferguson, Missouri. day after day of angry violence, revealing again the searing wound of divisions over race that linger for our nation. A young African-American man was killed by a policeman, and an entire community erupted, revealing long-standing distrust and resentment of the police, but also a wider sense that America still has a great deal to do in facing the destructive energies of racism that live on and on. Ours is a world in pain just now. Ours is a God who weeps and rages at the ways we wound each other. There seem to be so few answers now, but I can't help but think that Jesus has some questions for us. Why can't this tiny human race on this one small planet learn to live in peace? Why can't Palestine and Israel, all of them God's children, create the harmony they know they have to survive? Who will stop the killing in the Middle East? Who will protect the weak and care for the victims? Who will bear witness as the brave and deeply faithful James Foley did? When will America ever come to terms with the sin of racism that continues to poison its life? When will the people of Ferguson and the people of Houston and Atlanta and Chicago and Boston do the hard work of building a just community out of the damage of our past? And what does all this mean for Trinity Church? Questions after questions. The great poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote a letter, wonderful volume published, to a young poet. And in that letter, he chided the young poet for trying to figure things out so quickly, to have quick and easy answers for what he was going to do with his life, for what was going on in the world. And Rilke wrote, "Live the questions now, and perhaps gradually, without realizing it, one day you will live your way into the answer." And that's what brings us here week by week to this place, to allow Jesus to question us and for us to question each other, to probe beyond the obvious and the easy and the pat, to probe into the deep mystery of who we are and why we are and what we can be for each other. Thank God for the strange, unsettling questions Jesus asks. We don't know where all these questions will take us, what new callings we as a community will discover as we allow ourselves to be questioned by this God, or what new closeness we'll find as we ponder and enter into the mystery of God in this question and answer struggle. What we do know is that now, today, He's putting one question to us: who do you say that I am? Will you come with me, be questioned by me, question one another for me, and together we will unveil and discover some answers.